So our next speaker is Andy Leve. She's an award-winning journalist, works in radio and television and other platforms. She'll be talking about, on her presentation, Fur and Africans Reported Lands, the dangers of a single story. Welcome, Andy. I wonder if you can, yeah. Are you unmuted?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, yes. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you very much for the honor of being able to speak on this panel. And yes, as you said, I will be speaking about the danger of a single story through the lens of an African journalist, which is what I am. Just a little bit about me in a nutshell. I am a storyteller at heart, no matter the medium. So I have an honors degree in journalism and media studies, majoring in television and documentary making, and I've spent the better part of my decade career span in broadcasting, not just for South African publications and mediums, but also for a string of European mainstream media agencies. And so a lot of what I'm speaking on today is influenced by those myriads of experiences. I must preface this talk by quoting Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie when she says, "The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story." And so when reporting on Africa, there tends to be a singular thread that's used by media to bind the over 50 countries on the continent. And so this single lens approach to our diverse continent creates the perception that Africa is just one thing. And that obviously robs people of nuance, and it robs people and countries, communities at large, of a multifaceted lived existence. It both negates and invalidates autonomy. And the more that this type of coverage of Africa becomes a standard in newsrooms, the more discriminatory beliefs, such as being called the dark continent, are perpetuated to this very day. The more Africa is likely to be infantilized, the more it's likely to be regarded as backward, and the more the West versus the rest dichotomy becomes clearer. And sure, a lot has been said and a lot has been written and a lot has been done to prove that Western reporting of Africa has somewhat moved away from this, right? So we see it with how international news outlets have programs that are specifically produced to put a spotlight on positive news stories that go on in Africa. I know CNN has, an Africa Bureau. The BBC also has an Africa Bureau. However, even such media giants revert to addressing Africa as one thing. A fellow journalist, Afua Hirsch, says that the media's tendency to run an Africa season has its own flaws, because once that season is over, little in the mainstream coverage actually changes. And when Africa is reported on in this way, we run the risk of dehumanizing entire nations. And what we in essence do, even as journalists ourselves, is uphold structural forms of bias and privilege that thrive on viewing Africa as one thing. It results in media just reinstating pre-existing assumptions that are either set up in history books or in other literature about the continent. Political analyst Nanjala Nyabolo elaborates on the West versus the rest duality that I spoke about, saying that events or situations in Africa are often analyzed as what the West is not. So there's this duality, there's this spectrum, there's this othering that continues in the mainstream. And on a granular level, linguistic factors and details often get lost or they're watered down in translation. And all of these seemingly micro factors actually contribute to this single story approach. There are idiosyncrasies and even region-specific lexicons. You think of Nigeria with their pidgin English that add textures to people's stories. And often these colors and hues are lost in translation or not even picked up on by Western media. Yes, there are, of course, stories of poverty. Yes, there are stories of coups. And yes, there are stories of corruption, but newsflash, these are not unique to Africa. And I'm not suggesting that these issues must not be reported on. And neither am I saying that we should sugarcoat. But the coverage would be greatly improved if it is led by journalists who do not have an us versus them archaic lens on the African continent. And I must stress on the African continent, because Africa is not a country. The late Kenyan writer Binyawanga Mainana brilliantly captured all of this in his essay. I'm sure some of you may have heard this, but those who have not, I'll read it to you. How to write about Africa in a sarcastic tone. You must always include the starving African who wanders the refugee camp nearly naked and waits for the benevolence of the West, he wrote. Her children have flies on their eyelids and pot bellies, and her breasts are flat and empty. She must look utterly helpless. She can have no past, no history. Such diversions ruin the dramatic moment. Moans are good. In conclusion, I think journalists from the West who are sent to countries in Africa as foreign correspondents can go back to the fundamentals of journalism by asking Africans what they think and have them tell their own stories instead of co-opting them to undermine or reinforce existing narratives among the Western/global audience. Let us not, as journalists, perpetuate a devastating colonial history and legacy that robbed people not only of the material, but of their multi-dimensional existence. Said, I'm sure many of you who've been in the newsroom have heard that being flung around. And so the false dichotomy between positive and negative stories shows how reporting lacks storytelling, which was crucial for letting audiences in on events within a wider sphere of experiences on the continent. So in other words, it all goes back to nuance. It all goes back to the layered existence and experience. And that when you are a reporter and you're in the field, it is far more than just sticking a microphone into someone's face or not even doing that. It is far more than just being a fly on the wall, in a manner of speaking. It's really contextualizing and giving your audience a story as opposed to a flash moment in time, particularly when reporting about Africa, particularly the lens that the West still has that is based upon prejudice and history. And as a reader, look for perspectives from diverse storytellers. Look for the greater context. Let's use storytelling to break down stereotypes and racial untruths that can be applied in our daily lives. Use counter narratives to find and amplify people's voices, and most importantly, give context and a holistic, layered picture. This approach will provide a path to helping people overcome adversity and achieve necessary milestones for success, despite any limiting popular opinion. Despite what you see on the news or hear in your own communities, people should not be defined by labels. People have the potential to achieve whatever they set their minds to, and counter narratives serve to keep everyone not only motivated, but engaged. So operating from the context of a single story can prevent us from getting a more complex view of a situation. And perpetuating that single story really has a strong connection to who holds power and who does not. Because power enables some to define individuals and situations, once again, from that particular lens. In any situation, who tells the story, how and when, can impact situations greatly. The way we make sense of situations leads to these narratives that may be harmful if they are left unexamined. So in essence, we need to check ourselves. And doing so will really, really not only broaden the landscape of what it means to be, for me, an African reporter, but also help everyone who is of this hue navigate in spaces that often feel like you do not belong, you know? And sometimes, even as a reporter in your own country, you're made to feel that what you're telling and the nuance that you're able to provide as a storyteller is immaterial because you are not from the West. Thank you. Let's connect. I am available to further talk about this and other things, VE, and on LinkedIn also, Andy Leve, or my website, www.andyleve.com. Thank you.